Greetings. I'm Naya Blair Hackworth. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Director of Inclusion in the NCAA Office of Inclusion, where I support our race and ethnicity and disability efforts. On behalf of the Office of Inclusion, in partnership with the NCAA Sports Science Institute, thank you for joining us today for our Part 2 series, Speak Up, You Are Not Alone, a panel discussion on tools and best practices to support student-athlete mental health and well-being. Today's panel features mental health professionals from our NCAA membership institutions. As we continue the dialogue on mental health and well-being, we want to acknowledge and send our sincere thoughts to those in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas who were affected by Hurricane Laura. Also, let us not lose sight of the racial injustices that continue to devalue the lives of Black Americans. And let us not only say a change needs to happen, but be a part of actions that lead to meaningful change. Racial injustices, the numerous impacts of the global pandemic, all affect one's mental health. Today's conversation with our mental health providers will complement yesterday's dialogue where Ivy Watts, a former student athlete, shared her story with mental health and the importance of using your voice in seeking help. She also reminded all of us that we are worthy, capable, and good enough. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Dr. Kenza Gunter. Dr. Kenza Gunter is a licensed psychologist and a certified mental health consultant in her Atlanta-based private practice. She works with athletes and teams providing mental health, mental performance, and consultation services. She is a member of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, External Mental Health Task Force, and she's also the president-elect for the Association for Applied Psychology. Without further delay, let's welcome Dr. Kenza Gunter.
Thank you so much, Naya, and thank you to all of you who are joining in. We appreciate you taking the time to be here and sincerely hope that this conversation will be helpful for you in terms of thinking about tools, skills, and strategies that you can use as we continue to move forward from this moment into the next, and helping you to move forward in a mentally healthy way. As you heard, my name is Kenza Gunter, and I'm a clinical sports psychologist, and I am very excited to be here to facilitate this dialogue with our esteemed panelists who will be joining us. Again, you will hear conversation. We will have a moment at the end of the discussion for Q&A. So if you have thoughts that come up, please hold on to those or submit them in the chat if you can, so that we can respond to some of the questions that may be most relevant to you. Again, the purpose is for you to leave this conversation, hopefully, with some skills and tools that will help you moving forward in life in a mentally healthy way. So without further ado on that, allow me to introduce our first panelist. And each panelist will introduce themselves. So I will tell you who they are, and then they'll share a little bit with you about who they are and why they are participating in our panel today. So first up, we have Abigail Eiler, who will share a bit about who she is and tell us a little about herself. Hi, Abigail.
Good morning, Dr. Gunter. So I'm actually going to start out in my native language. English is actually my third language. So I'm going to start off in my native language because it roots me in the work that I do, and it centers how I pay respect to those that came before me and those that will come after me as a multicultural woman. So, Nigonga Makwayandishnikas, Shani Tuscarora Undao, Makwa Undoram, Hammond Indian and Donjiba, Kenton, Michigan Undao. So welcome. I'm very happy to join you all on the panel today. I am Abigail Eiler. I'm a clinical licensed social worker in the state of Michigan, and I've been also an educator for a little over 15 years in academia. I've worked with tribal and non-tribal communities all across the country and in Canada. I'm currently a clinical assistant professor of social work at the University of Michigan, and also serve as our chief diversity officer, and assistant athletic director and director of athletic counseling. I serve as the chair of the Big Ten Mental Health Cabinet, and I am a representative on Michigan's task force, the Anti-Hate and Anti-Racism Coalition, also through the Big Ten. Really focusing on patient-centered work, strengths-based, and culturally responsive frameworks. So again, happy to be here today and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Certainly, it sounds like you are offering support in a number of different ways, and I really look forward to our discussion in which we talk about the ways in which mental health and culture intersect and how we can help our student athletes navigate these times, particularly as it relates to their identities and protecting their mental health. So thank you so much. And next up, we have Dr. Jacob Cooper.
Thank you so much, Kenta. It's so good to be here. It's so good to see all of y'all. My name is Dr. Jacob Cooper, and I serve as a clinical psychologist in the state of North Carolina. Specifically, I serve as the Director of Sports Psychology Services at Appalachian State University in Western North Carolina. My training and background is specifically in applying and serving athletes in their mental health performance needs. And then additionally, I also serve as the chair of our newly formed cultural committee here at Appalachian State through our athletics department. And additional interests and additional specializations within my training and experiences has been serving as a mental health care provider in rural communities here in Appalachia and on the western side of North Carolina, West Virginia, Indiana, a little bit more remote communities. And that's where some of my training experience and expertise lies. And mostly that's been through serving veterans through different communities, through the Veterans Hospital, and also student athletes and professional athletes that reside in some of those communities. I'm really excited to be here and to be a part of this awesome conversation and serve in any way possible.
Thank you so much. And again, you also service your student athletes in a variety of contexts, and I appreciate the rural component that's brought in, and look forward to us talking about that more in our discussion today as it relates to that rural identity and how that affects people. So I'm going to invite both Dr. Cooper and Abigail to rejoin me on the screen, and we're actually going to just jump right into our questions and our discussions. Certainly, all of us are mental health professionals, but that may look different in terms of the work we do and how we interact with clients in our space. So I guess the first question that I would like to pose to you, just to kind of level set for the audience, is, can you describe your role as a mental health professional? And with that, what is your main focus when working with student athletes?
I can start. So I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I provide a full range and spectrum of care. Those that are coming in to optimize and enhance performance, to those that are experiencing some pretty debilitating emotional distress with different psychiatric disorders. Every day, I'm grateful for the time that I get to spend with the student athletes as they explore their identity and evolve into the best version of who they want to be. I'm patient-centered, so that means that our student athletes drive the process. And I serve as a support that listens and explores and challenges and helps create transformative change by listening, right? And by helping them in their day-to-day lives. I've found that by being a culturally responsive practitioner and being very humanistic in my approach, believing that everyone that comes in to see me has their own experiences, has their own beliefs and values, and I try and bring that into the session and respect that and honor that, because we know that those are protective factors and they help people grow. And so I found that by being a mental health provider, specifically at Michigan and in other areas, that if I can be a place where they can have authentic relationships, a safe place to engage, to talk freely in a place that's confidential without judgment, the student athletes thrive. And so that's really been my focus, right? To be culturally responsive, respectful, and creating a safe, nurturing space.
Yeah, what I hear you saying there is that the athletes are allowed to be the people that they are, where their humanity is at the forefront of the interactions that you have. And it's not just about what they do, but truly who they are, and really trying to honor who they are and work with the person in order to listen, respect, elevate, and assist them in whatever way they may need.
Absolutely. It's extremely important for their development and their transformation.
Yeah. Jacob, I want to get you in on this as well. What are some of the things that you focus on in your work with student athletes?
Absolutely. And Abigail, that was so well said about providing the spectrum of care. We know that evidence suggests pretty convincingly that athletes often present even significant mental health concerns as performance issues. And that's usually how they see them. And that's their understanding of some of the symptoms that they have. Not everything can be a clinical issue. Not everything is a performance issue. And really, I approach things, I usually use these two A's, an advocate and an arbiter. So an advocate is somebody that in a mental health space, sometimes I have to advocate for the athletes and how some of the unique presentations and stressors that they're under. And then sometimes in the athlete, in the sport realm, I have to advocate for the humanity and holistic wellness of those athletes. And also arbiter. So arbiter is a fancy word for like negotiator. I sometimes say like, I talk to our sports psychology team and I'll say, be the bridge, be the bridge. And what I mean by that is that we kind of have to walk in two worlds. So I'm embedded within athletics, but I'm also connected into our community in Boone, North Carolina, and our community of providers. And that's kind of the model that we've built here at Appalachian and are continuing to adapt. And really a focus of how I try to work with athletes is to be culturally humble. And that means that I approach each person with curiosity. I believe that behavior tells a story. So regardless of what an athlete's coming in to share with me, I want to hear that story. I want to give them space to address a lot of the barriers and the low help seeking and the things that we know exist with student athletes and athletes broadly. And also what I mean by that is providing, secure services where I can be within the world, but they know that I'm going to respect their confidentiality and my ethics and responsibilities as a mental health care provider. And I also understand a baseline level of some of their culture and their expectations that they have coming in. It also means that I'm not the answer to a lot of things. For example, what we've cultivated here at Appalachian State is a network, because we're in a rural community, not that many mental health care providers, of connecting and using our alumni in Charlotte to build a network of therapists of color for student athletes that would like to work with a therapist of color. We know race can be a salient factor in feeling heard. And so my role sometimes falls into as a coordinator position, where I broach those topics, give athletes space to talk about what those needs are, and then coordinate to get them connected. If not me, another. And I'm constantly broaching those issues and working as a collaborative team community because we need everybody we can and tackling some of the issues and the overall wealth of mental health responsibilities we have to support our athletes.
Absolutely. I'm hearing in that conversation, you are trying to create a community around them, right? Approaching them with humility, understanding that everybody has a story that we need to hear. And I love that you're advocate and you're a negotiator, the arbiter, right? And so many people think of mental health professionals and they think, oh, you just sit and talk. But no, there are actually many other ways in which both of you have described helping and trying to help and assist your student athletes. I think another role in there is education, right? We're educators to put a face to mental health because what we know is a stigma exists. And sometimes student athletes can be struggling in silence, right? And they're dealing with things and they're experiencing challenges, but they don't really understand how mental health can be helpful for them or what it is to go and see someone. Just yesterday, Ivy Watts' story that included her struggles with anxiety and self-worth, depression, and she was a stellar student doing all of that. From the outside, everybody thought that she had it together, but she was struggling with silence. Right? Because again, there's that stigma sometimes that student athletes should have it all together. So what would you say to the student athlete who may be struggling silently? What would you say to encourage them to know that this is a resource that truly is available to them?
Yeah, I think, there are two things initially that come to mind. First and foremost is that when they're ready, there are resources available for what their needs are, right? Dr. Cooper just talked about like that network and that community of care, and that looks very different in different communities, but there are people that are available to help when they're ready. And I think the second thing is your health and welfare matter and you matter, right? That's what I tell all of our student athletes because I genuinely believe that. And that there are trained people out there that can respond to what their needs are. And so I would encourage people to try it out, right? To reach out for help and to communicate and convey what their needs are. when they're in a place where they feel that they can do so, or asking for help to get to those places specifically.
Yeah, Jacob, what would you say to that? How would you encourage someone to maybe take a risk and step beyond that stigma and seek help if they needed it?
Yeah. Sometimes I make the analogy of when we build relationships and we broaden our circle, it gives us a little anxiety, right? There's always a necessary step of vulnerability. But the story we tell ourselves behind that is very important. Does this anxiety mean that I can't handle this, that I'm afraid and I'm in danger if I talk to this person? Or does this mean that I'm onto something meaningful? I know that a lot of relationships, they start and there's full of that. So I think asking yourself, okay, what story am I telling myself behind some of these emotions or some of this hesitancy that I feel? I sometimes make another analogy to our physical health. So if an athlete is having a flare-up and having some pain in their knee, sometimes they can be hesitant to disclose that to their trainer because they know what that might mean and they're on the trainer's radar. But they also know in the back of their mind that in order to prevent a big issue, it's important to address it while it's just a little bit of pain, while it's nagging like that. And so sometimes I'll make the same analogy. Don't wait until, just like a physical muscle, don't wait for it to decompensate or get worse and worse. Approach your mental health like you would your physical health, or keep that in mind. And that can help you kind of push through that normal approach avoidance when we're stepping into any type of new relationship and combating some of the stigma that's there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that notion of you don't have to necessarily be unwell or sick in order to go and get help. Right. And so mental health is not just about responding in the moments of crisis or adversity, but certainly we can all benefit from speaking with someone and from just having a safe place to learn new skills and get support. Right. And so we have our third panelist who has joined us, and I want to just pause for a moment to get him into the conversation as well. Mr. Dozie Nwagwu has joined us. If you will turn on your video, welcome. Thank you so much. We also understand in the world of mental health that things happen. So we appreciate you being here and joining us now.
Absolutely. So I guess I can start with the introduction. My name is Dozie Nwagwu. I am a staff counselor and the ADAP coordinator at Emporia State University. I work with student athletes through the Men of Excellence program. I'm a former student athlete myself here at the MIAA D2 division. I played football, and now I'm in a position to help back at the university that kind of all made this possible for me. So I really appreciate being able to be here and share some of the things that have worked out for us here in Emporia. It's a little smaller school, and the demographics might be a little bit different. So hopefully as we go along, I can share some of the specifics that we have dealt with and how we've kind of overcome them, to see if we can kind of share and help out some of the other universities.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on the question we're on now. And so let me share that question with you. We're talking about how student athletes may be sometimes struggling in silence. It may be difficult for them to seek support and to actually go and see a mental health professional. And certainly when we think about those from different cultural and ethnic groups, there may be different beliefs, cultural beliefs, that prevent them from seeking help. So what would you say to a student athlete who was struggling, who was hesitant about going to seek services? What would you say to encourage them to take that step and potentially work with a mental health professional?
Well, it's awesome that you asked that, because I tuned in right when Jacob Cooper was sharing his perspective on that, and I kind of have a similar one. I think that mental health has not gotten the attention that it needs in comparison to physical health. I think the example was a knee injury. If somebody were to have, a knee injury, coaches, athletes, everybody's okay with talking about that and making sure that it gets addressed immediately. But, when you have a mental health problem, it's kind of silenced. That's not talked about. And I think that that's absurd, given that this is the most complex organ in the world. I mean, the human brain is very complex. And I think that it's, so yeah, I would probably say something along the lines of that, but also just normalizing what mental health is. We all go through something. I think making examples of a different type of mental health issues in not such a severe way. So for example, we all experience anxiety in some capacity throughout our day. It could be something as simple as waiting in a line or waiting for our food or whatever. I mean, the symptoms might not be severe, but I think giving examples, where somebody might experience a mental health issue that's not as severe, and we can, relate to it and say, oh, well, that's what anxiety is, or that's what this is. And I think that helps out a little bit to be able to identify these things in other areas.
Absolutely, that normalizing is really, really important. And so what I want to do now is bring this conversation about mental health to the current moment that we're in. Certainly, there have been an increase in the acts of racialized violence that we have witnessed in our society, certainly globally, but definitely here within the States, dating back to May and April, right? And so we know that witnessing those encounters and those injustices has an effect on our mental health. And so specifically, as we talk about the racial injustice that we're currently facing and navigating in our society, even this week, on Wednesday, we had pro sports leagues kind of shut down to elevate and amplify the call for change and for more justice in the wake of all this. So if you think about mental health, what are some strategies that you would offer for people in terms of how to manage your mental health during this time of social unrest and the violence that we're seeing? How can we protect our mental health? And I'll open that to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that I have encouraged a lot of our athletes, our community members, my family members, everyone to come together and to engage in conversations. One of the things that we have done at Michigan is we've started student athlete unity discussions that actually don't just include student athletes. They also include staff and coaches. We formed a group called Wolverines Against Racism, also known as WAR. Our student athletes are so used to having structure and consistency in their daily schedule. And now when you blend that with online learning and sometimes even deferments and enrollment, there's all these changes that are going on in their life. So I really encourage people to reach out for support. And to sometimes do that more collaboratively than independently, but obviously people need to do what's in their best interest, what works most for them. As someone that continues to see racial justice issues rise in our communities, we know that these are not new issues. We know that these are not areas in which we haven't fought and addressed before historically. I am the granddaughter of a Black Native male that was killed by the police. So these are topics that are very near and dear to my heart. And so, I've been encouraging people to take care of themselves in a way by attending maybe virtual groups, coming together in community conversations, learning and listening and creating intentional plans for next steps. So those would be my initial thoughts.
I love hearing about some of these initiatives and the creativity, for sure. I'll add a couple brief suggestions on top, you know what I mean? And one, sometimes a strategy can be from a psychoeducational level. So one thing I've talked a lot with coaches and with athletes is sometimes recognizing the overlap of the pandemic and some of these events, with these things that they have a relationship with one another. What we know from research regarding post-traumatic growth, with research regarding terror management theory, is that in times when mortality salience, so death, is a little bit more in the front of us, like when there's a pandemic, when mortality salience is high, out-group biases go up and in-group biases go up. So that means when there's a greater perceived threat of death, like there is during a pandemic, we tend to we turn inward towards our inner tribe, and we become a lot more suspect of the other. And that's a social psychology thing. That's a survival piece. And so those things that are interlinked to emphasizing already existing occurrences in these things of social injustice. And so these things are connected to one another, which sometimes can be helpful to understand, because underneath those things is fear of on both sides. And having space to understand some of those core emotions that are happening can really prevent that in-group, out-group bias from fueling discriminatory behaviors. When you have a place to recognize that there's actually this common emotion between the in-group and out-group of this fear of the unknown, fear of death, some normal fears that we all have. So one thing is psychoeducation. The other piece is behaviorally, be mindful of your certainty-seeking behaviors. So all of us have those automatic things like news, something pops, bang, I pick this up. Twitter, Instagram, email, Twitter, Instagram, email. Or I reach out and I talk to that person, or I just go for a run. A lot of those aren't necessarily bad behaviors, but when we instantly do it, it kind of forms a form of adaptive avoidance. We don't actually feel how we're feeling. We don't check in with ourselves. And that actually stores up. And we can avoid it for a little bit with those adaptive avoidance behaviors. So be aware of what yours are, what you do to seek certainty in uncertain times. And you might ultimately engage in that behavior, particularly it's an adaptive one. But before you do that, take a moment to pause, breathe, be mindful of what experience you're having, emotion you're having. Know it's impermanent and that it's normal. Track the sensations and really ride it like a wave, as opposed to just letting it kind of sit, doing your little circle of avoidance, and then it's there waiting for you when you come back a lot of times.
Yeah, and I think for so many people, it feels like no matter what they do, it does keep coming back. Like these situations continue to happen, and it's not just one situation that's occurred, but certainly when we think about this racial injustice, this is a cumulative effect of not only what's happened this year, but what has happened over the last several years that we've seen. And so I definitely hear and appreciate the finding your community of support. Social support can be really integral in us maintaining our mental health and also in developing resilience, right? Naming your emotions. It can feel easier to avoid what I'm feeling as opposed to naming our emotions. So I didn't share much about what I do, but I work with athletes as well in my private practice. And I've had the opportunity to work with several pro athletes here in the last several months, and really helping them get back to the essentials, I think, is important. I think this is relevant for our collegiate student athletes as well. Being intentional about sleep and nutrition and movement. And I know that as a student athlete, you're engaging in workouts, but making sure that there's some movement that you're doing, rest. Those things are really important towards managing our energy so that we can continue to deal with a world that feels uncertain, chaotic, and out of control. And also realize that it's exhausting. Self-care has to be a part of our activism work, right? And so Dozie, certainly want to get you in on this if you're there as well. But what have you done on your institutions to support your student athletes being involved in activism during this time? How are you supporting their efforts in that movement, in this movement?
So we definitely do have support groups, kind of like Abigail mentioned. We have a different demographic here. And I know that we're talking about, more underrepresented students, but I think we've taken a little different approach. We have, predominantly, white students and white student athletes here at Emporia, and we haven't quite done it yet because we're trying to figure out how exactly to do this, but it's kind of like unpacking whiteness. Just having students, and everybody's invited, but just having those really deep, tough, conversations to be had. A lot of the times they're uncomfortable. And I think that kind of like Jacob mentioned, we get kind of in this pattern of thinking when you start to believe or anticipate, these false beliefs. And I think I've really tried to emphasize, re-evaluating your epistemology. This is the study of knowledge. Where do we get this information from? Why do we believe these things? Going to Twitter, Instagram, all these things, like are these sources reliable? Am I hearing, so I think a lot of times, just re-evaluating, your epistemology. How did you find this information out? Is this really true? A lot of times we act and we have these very strong feelings on information that might not be accurate. But so I guess support groups, I mean, let's see, first order needs, just kind of like you mentioned, a lot of times mental health might present itself in a form different, in a different form. So addressing, making sure these student athletes have food, water, shelter, things as simple as that can exacerbate, a different issue, a somatic issue that doesn't seem to be related directly to anything. So, just looking at the entire person, not just, the pandemic or the situation, but looking at everything with the individual and evaluating them for them in the situation that they're in.
Yeah, and the question started off about the racialized violence that we've seen, but you're absolutely right. We're still dealing with a pandemic. There's economic uncertainty that is affecting our student athletes in different ways. We talk about connecting virtually, and that assumes that someone has access to technology, right?
Yes.
And really being mindful about what different experiences people may be having. Food insecurity is a very real thing that some student athletes are experiencing, right? And then being concerned about their family members and their loved ones in different ways who may not be at the institutions where they are, but that still doesn't go away. The concern about them and their well-being doesn't go away. And so thinking holistically, not just about the athlete that you're seeing in front of you and the life that you see them living on campus, but what's going on in their broader life. Again, going back to the human, right? The person who is connected to family and loved ones. And so certainly there is a lot, and our student athletes are managing a lot. And I appreciate hearing that for you all, it's not just about one area, but trying to take care of the whole person, right? And so are there any other ways in which you all are trying to support your student athletes in this moment of uncertainty that we're dealing with? We know student athletes are used to structure, schedules, control, and feeling like they have some knowledge of what's coming next. And so anything else that you're doing to help them, or this is the other part of that question, what are you doing to help coaches understand how all of this is impacting their student athletes so that they can be a critical support system?
I know that our director here at the counseling center has had some psychoeducational trainings for coaches. It was a little bit before, the racial injustice and all those kind of things happened. This was kind of revolved around a specific event that we had on our campus that had to do with mental health. And I think that this really generated early movement to be able to get coaches involved in the conversation about mental health. But having, that hierarchy of power, we have a president that's involved with the NCAA. It starts at the top. And I think that making coaches aware and promoting mental health has been a good, first step for us to get coaches involved in understanding about, how to screen or even what to look for in student athletes that might be experiencing mental problems.
Sure. Abigail, I think you were trying to say something, but I believe you might have been on mute a moment ago when you were trying to make your statement. So want to swing that over to you. What are your thoughts there?
So one of the things that I have noticed, so we're available to our student athletes really 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, especially for urgent related issues, but we've become more accessible to them, even if that is possible. And there's reasons for that. It's because right now our student athletes are really grappling with, what is going on, what is their role, how can they support each other? And our coaches are reaching out with the same type of questions. So we have a group at the University of Michigan called Athletes Connected. Athletes Connected really aims to reduce stigma, but it also provides education, and is also where all of our groups are housed. Our support groups and our psychoeducation groups, as well as our psychotherapy groups. So we just started a coaches branch during the pandemic called Coaches Connected. So we're meeting monthly and sometimes more with our coaches to provide psychoeducation and support for our coaches to better understand, identify, and assist when athletes are experiencing a range of mental health conditions, and also when they're dealing with different issues related to racial justice or injustice. We consult with our coaches pretty often on different mental health related issues, not disclosing any protected health information because we all are confidential members of our community in athletics. But we make sure that if our student athletes want our coaches to know more, that they are signing that release of information. We also will recommend team sessions, and that whole concept of like when we're all involved and we're all hearing the same things, there's an opportunity for everybody to benefit and to grow together. And we also sometimes will help our student athletes by meeting with our coaches, maybe in a triad, or maybe there's more people involved to identify what support is directly needed. Dozie really talks about that person and environment approach, and I think that's important because not only, again, are you dealing with the individual, you're dealing with all these different layers of support and systems around them. And all of those things need to be considered when we're identifying what specifically is going to be helpful for that individual or that team.
Absolutely. We can work with the individual day in and day out, but if the system is not supportive or positive or facilitating positive mental health, then it becomes a challenge. And we know that the coaches really do play a large role in creating that culture. And so wonderful to hear that there are efforts to not only incorporate the coaches in the training and education that's provided to the student athletes, but also remembering the coaches are people too. And so providing them direct care is also a really essential piece. One of the questions that we had come in, and Jacob, I'm going to come to you for this one because you and potentially Dozie, Abigail, certainly you have thoughts, but the question is around smaller institutions who may not have as much access to resources. And yes, there might be an on-campus counseling center, but it's generally full because they're servicing the entire community. And so what suggestions or thoughts do you have for those smaller institutions who need support? Students may not have money to go and get resources off campus. How can they access support in those communities where the resources may be limited?
Yeah, that is certainly something that we run into, in Boone and at Appalachian State and some of the universities that maybe don't have the same type of budget resources, or they're not around as many kind of urban centers where there's not as many providers, and so you gotta sometimes be creative. I think two strategies that we've deployed here at App State is one is really being connected to a community of practice for yourself as you might be a provider there or a coach, and it can feel like you're the only one a lot of times. And so being able to have a consultative group for yourself to find creative ways, kind of like this, but then a community of providers. There are a lot of providers out there, for example, in Boone and Charlotte, that I've found that are willing to see students on a sliding scale, that some are willing to even see them for free. And really the backbone of that has just been building relationships with people in North Carolina. And that's hard work. There's no easy answer, because it's like, how much time do you have to be building those relationships? But that's really the cornerstone, is building relationships, utilizing your alumni network. You might be surprised how many alumni might really care about this and help connect therapists that are willing to see somebody virtually for less money, or to kind of meet them at that need if they were aware of that need. So deploy those strategies, tap into the alumni network, tap into your communities, build those relationships, because you might be surprised who might actually help. I've been shocked and amazed by the strong network here at App State to build that. And then the second strategy has really building interventions that are by athletes, for athletes, empowering. There's a lot of athletes that are willing to lead if given the opportunity. And yes, they need some help and they need some support. But for example, we've started a podcast here by the athletes, for the athletes, for them to share their stories, and they get some overwatch here and some groups. But I think there's a lot of amazing leaders out there that can lead supportive groups. For example, right now we have a group for our athletes that might be in quarantine. And I provide some psychoeducation and a little expertise there, but really these athletes can lead and they can support one another, and they want to do that. And some of them have interest in sports psychology. And so really it's supporting them and empowering them to help self-run some of these within, I think, appropriate, reason. They don't have to be therapists, but they can definitely have a hand within some of these interventions. So those are just two rough strategies of how to be creative when you have less budget and less resources.
Yeah, and I love that, using the alumni network and then tapping into your student athletes and asking what they want and need. Because sometimes when we think of help, I think we might just think of one-on-one individual therapy or just kind of group therapy led by a mental health professional, but there are so many ways to offer help and support. Those preventative services and educational services, podcasts can really be helpful. And Abigail, certainly would love to hear your voice in this as well, if you have any thoughts. But that I think is really, we might have to think outside of the box, right? And has telehealth, let me ask that, has telehealth helped and increased the access to services over the last few months? Have you all seen that, or do you all think that that can be a viable option for increasing the access to services?
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. So the licensing is difficult when you're going from states. In Kansas, I cannot ethically see somebody in Colorado or Missouri. So although it has opened up more access, at the same time, it's kind of limited because, when school shut down and students were kind of going back to their houses or to their homes, if they passed the state lines of Kansas, they were no longer eligible to be seen by us. And there was no system or anything that we had in play to be able to transfer them or, get them help elsewhere. So I saw a really big barrier with that. But just to kind of add before we move on too far away from what Jacob was sharing about the smaller institutions, we only have, we are all that we have. And it does seem like sometimes we're the only ones that are, making, efforts or strides to be able to provide for these students. But I've noticed the same thing. Students are really willing to engage and lead. The Men of Excellence program that I really keep emphasizing is just that, exactly. With the little bit of facilitation from myself, I see that students are really engaged and they're really excited to be able to jump in and do something for themselves. I mean, these student athletes aren't helpless. I think that they really have a lot of potential, but they just need somebody to kind of give them a little boost. And I've seen that in that group. As far as community connections, I think that's also a great idea. We have like the local community, mental health center. We have a couple of private practices. Although the relationships, are not as tight as we probably would like them to be, I do appreciate Jacob, providing that insight. I think that's wonderful. It's tough in the small community. I don't know how else to put it, but.
And I appreciate that honesty, because I think that's the reality, right? Like, we can talk about a lot of different hopes and wishes for creating resource and creating access, and we can certainly be as creative as possible. But in this current climate that we're in, when the economic difficulty, positions are being furloughed, some of the resources that may have been available may be more scarce. And so we really have to acknowledge the reality of where we are while still trying to find ways to offer and extend support. So we do have some questions in the chat, but I have one more question before we're going to transition to the Q&A piece. And so just thinking kind of very broadly, what are some of the changes that you've seen in the mental health field within the past year, and where do you think we're going as it relates to mental health and addressing mental health on our campuses?
Well, I guess I can start this one off. I think we are seeing a drastic improvement. I mean, people are starting to talk a lot more about mental health. It's not quite normalized the way we would like it to be, but I mean, even the pro athletes and, sharing their stories, I think that it's kind of spilling down into, collegiate athletes and understanding that, this person made it to this level, they're doing this, and they struggle with that. And I think, more athletes coming out and saying that is really powerful. And getting that conversation started. So I'm really happy with the progress that I've seen, worldwide with mental health and being accepted. So.
Interesting. In the midst of this challenge, it is creating opportunity for us to be more vocal about that aspect that has historically been held in secret, right? For us to just be more open and honest about it. Definitely. Yeah.
I'll add so I think you're right. I think someone told me this the other day. I was talking with a student veteran, and they said that, in times of war is when soldiers earn their stripes. And I think with this, I think that there's been a need, a call, a relevance of a growing movement of awareness that has allowed us to sometimes meet a need, and maybe a little desperation that is sometimes needed to engage in resources. And I think that it has moved in a positive direction. And then in terms of, you asked, where are we going? I think that we're starting with some symptom reduction and helping athletes navigate anxiety, depression, the things they're going through. But I think we're getting to some of the core issues, which for me, kind of really, a lot of times what I work around with athletes is these really narrow performance-based sense of identities, and how do we, and then how do we broaden that out to more purpose-based kind of self-narratives. There's a growing body of research that shows that there's a psychological cost to your self-worth being based in performance. And I think we're starting to realize just how widespread and predominant that type of self-worth and narrative is amongst athletes. I think sport kind of has a gravitational pull for all its joys and all it brings us. It keeps wanting more and more and more. It'll take everything. And I think it's revealing one of many core issues, but one core issue is that kind of truncated, narrow sense of self. And Ivy Watts, her story spoke to it so clearly yesterday. It was so great to hear, and how a part of her healing was finding her voice and broadening her sense of identity. And I think that's where we're going. I think we're starting to find language for that. I think we're starting to help normalize that trajectory and show that purpose fuels optimal performance in a healthier way than just having that be all of who you are.
Yes, that expansion of identity is so important. And Abigail, your thoughts. What changes have you seen in the field, and where are we going?
So, I've seen a significant increase in help-seeking behaviors. I did drop a link for Athletes Connected. That was one of our initiatives that we brought to Michigan in 2014. It was actually from an NCAA innovation grant that allowed and created an opportunity to provide more education, create groups, and to support one another in a holistic manner. And so that I found to be really helpful. And since we're seeing this significant increase in help-seeking behaviors, we also know that we need to be available and accessible to respond. We were talking about rural communities and institutions, right? And so Michigan is known to be one of the first schools to have an embedded licensed practitioner, and that was way back in the 80s. And we've grown since then. Now we have 7 providers. And we recognize and honor that not all institutions have that. And so it's been really important for myself as an educator and as the director of our department and an athletic director to kind of sit back and say, how can we help smaller schools? How can we help schools that don't have funding and don't have high rates of practitioners, but also have a significant number of student athletes that require services and deserve that support and care that we can provide to our athletes at Michigan. And so I've started looking at a lot of different grant opportunities to partner with smaller institutions to help build their workforce, so that, that is our way of being able to contribute to the profession as well as to the student athletes that need the support and care.
Yeah, and that also extends that notion of community beyond just your local community, but within the NCAA and the collegiate community across the country. And so that is fantastic. So it's wonderful to hear that those initiatives exist. So I'm going to transition a bit to some of our questions. And the first question relates to something that you mentioned, Jacob, about the psychosocial patterns during these times of heightened awareness of death. The question is, how does this relate to the history of murders of Black, Indigenous, people of color for our student athletes? So specifically, the question is, what is the impact of this type of heightened awareness of death being stretched out over our lifetime? How does that impact? The question is related to our, again, Black, Indigenous, and people of color students being able to access support services when their support structures may be predominantly white. So 2 questions seem to be in there. What's the effect of this heightened awareness of death? And if there is a cultural mismatch, if you will, between those seeking services and the service providers, how do we navigate that and still create access to help?
That's such a great observation, right? Because it mirrors what we were talking about. So if what they refer to in the literature as mortality salience, that death being in front of you, and how it fuels in-group and out-group bias. And then the people that you might need to help navigate that fear don't look like you. It might be part of an out-group. And so you see how it becomes cyclical very fast. And I think that that question really puts summary into that. I think it's not an easy thing to tackle. It's multivariable, but I'll tackle one piece. And I think one piece is that last statistic I chatted, over 80% of mental health care providers look like I do. They're white. And so we know from positive youth development that it helps to see people that look like you in a profession. It's positively indicated towards pursuing those professions. And so I think really approaching it from the roots is providing, or one thing that we try to do at App State, part of that network of providers in North Carolina, is provide shadowing experiences for when an athlete is interested in psychology and an athlete is from a traditionally marginalized group or an athlete of color is interested in sports psychology, wants to learn about it. It's a long process to become a mental health care provider. And there's a number of systemic barriers in the way, from testing to a number of pieces that I'm sure my colleagues could speak to more so than I. And is helping overcome some of those barriers by having them match and share with counselors of color to see others people doing it, to understand what goes into becoming that, and really approaching it from the roots and providing training experiences, exposure to that this is something you could do, that there's a need here. And if there's a passion for mental health, is really helping groom and help provide that opportunity for future therapists so that we can better balance that need. And so when the people need help, they see somebody they feel like they could talk to.
Or creating that pipeline. And this actually ties back to an earlier question that we had. How are professional associations recruiting more persons of color into the mental health care profession? So you talk about that pipeline as it relates to student athletes being exposed to the profession and the field and understanding that this could be a career path for them. But I would also say from a professional association standpoint, I serve as the president-elect for the Association of Applied Sports Psychology, and I'm also a part of the American Psychological Association. And there's a very strong awareness of the lack of persons of color when it comes to those being the provider. And so at our institutions, I think the word that comes to mind for me is being intentional about including in your search, looking for diverse individuals to serve in these positions. It's not a matter of there not being professionals available, but thinking about where you promote job opportunities and where you send those listings can really affect who responds. And so being really intentional about reaching out to professional organizations who do have persons of color in these mental health and mental performance positions can at least increase the exposure that our institutions have to who may be available to serve in these roles. I think we really have to be very intentional, and also thinking about, from an institutional standpoint, the bias that may exist within our systems that results in us continuing to hire the same types of people, right? We don't necessarily want to think of ourselves as having bias, but all of us hold some unconscious bias. And so really looking at and examining our hiring processes and procedures at the collegiate level to make sure that we are truly creating opportunities to bring in diverse people in these mental health and mental performance positions, I think could be really, really important. Another question that came up in relation to buy-in from coaches. What has been effective? What have you all found to be effective in creating buy-in for coaches who may not see mental health as an important concern?
I mean, I think the education piece of it is what is so important. When I sit down and I talk to coaches, whether it be individually or collectively, we have conversations about what is the most important part of your job, right? And they're like, it's to nurture and develop our student athletes. They want to see them thrive in the classroom. They want to see them thrive in practice and competition, and they want to see them, develop into, again, the best version of themselves. And then I'll ask them, what do you believe it takes to get there? And they're like, okay, it takes structure, it takes patience, it takes, and they'll go through a whole list of things that, we know to be essential for human development, right? That are pivotal in ensuring that our student athletes are thriving both in the classroom and in sport and in life. And then I tie that all back to mental health. I let them know that, that is the basis of mental health, and that we all have mental health, right? It's not absent, right, from any of our lives. And so it's being able to normalize it and to provide that insight of, in order to get them to where they want to be and where they can thrive and where you're hoping that they land in life, we've got to ensure that they are mentally healthy, physically fit, and really goal driven, right, to achieve whatever outcomes is that they're trying to achieve and that you're trying to help them achieve. And so that's kind of what I have found to be really critical and essential.
Yeah, absolutely. The education around it and not separating the two, right? Like, I think I heard you say that in your message of health is health. It includes both the physical and the mental, and really educating our coaches about that, not only as it relates to their athletes, but as it relates to them. I think coaches' mental health is something we don't necessarily talk about a lot, but that's one way to really increase that buy-in, is getting them to understand how this all plays out within them, right? Not just in their student athletes. So we have another question here. He talks about seeing an increase in help-seeking behaviors over the last year or so. And so the question is, have you seen any other clear patterns? So for example, have you seen any increases in any particular groups that are reaching out for help? So injured student athletes who may be a member of a cultural ethnic group. Have you seen any clear patterns as related to that in terms of that help seeking? Is any one group seeking more help than another? I can say in my experience, I've kind of seen just an increase in a willingness to seek help across the board, whether it be coaches, whether it's athletes, whether it's staff. I've had, over the course of the last several months, people who have never reached out for mental health services reaching out for support. And so I think that goes along with that normalization that we talked about. And I imagine that on our college campuses, we may see, particularly I think for our students of color, given what's happening in the world, even if there's not an increase in help seeking, I think it might be important to check on their mental health in a very intentional way. And I say students of color, certainly that applies to all students, but just thinking about the unique moment that we find ourselves in and the impact that they may be having.
Yeah, Kenza, I couldn't agree more. That what I have noticed significantly is that there is an increase in everyone reaching out for help and support at this time. But what I can say has been a theme is definitely processing grief, right? From the moment that seasons were abruptly ended, it was this state of shock and denial. And then they worked through pain and guilt and anger and negotiating and bargaining, and then some even experiencing depressive symptoms from it until they recognized what was going on. They reached out, received the support that they needed, and then kind of had that upward turn of okay, now what comes next? The acceptance and hope that Ivy actually talked about yesterday. She said, I kind of went from a place of saying everything has to be perfect. I have to be perfect until I learn to accept self. And so I've noticed that it's happening individually, but it's also happening collectively. So these processing the stages of grief is something that I've actually seen a significant increase in collegiate athletics right now.
Absolutely. I don't know if Jacob or Dozie, if you all had any additional thoughts that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think that the one population I think I've seen a pattern in is more coaches are reaching out. More coaches are reaching out as individuals and on behalf of players. And I think that, Abigail said it really well about kind of supporting them and providing that space to normalize and giving them language. I think the only thing that I would add from just my experience the past few months is starting with them as people. They're obviously not your clients, but coaches are under tremendous amounts of pressure. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we have to have a conversation first about hey, this is a safe place to maybe say a dangerous thing. It's okay. Like with these coaches about, some of them are talking about issues for the first time. And I can create, as a psychologist and as a colleague, somebody that can give them that space to find the words that they can then share with their teams about how much they care about their athletes and things like that. And so much pressure is on winning all the time that it's just that sometimes when they can't figure something out with regard to the mental health of their team, they're used to steering away from that because it could reflect incompetence or that they're not a good coach or something like that. And so many times the language, it's like, you're not a psychologist, coach. Why would you know how to do this? It's okay. It's all right. I wouldn't have a job if you knew how to do this. And so taking that out of the room, that it's okay. And then I think so treating them as people. And then the second thing is helping coaches see, I think a lot of times coaches see issues or mental health things as a will issue and helping them see it as a skill issue. A lot of athletes have trauma backgrounds, histories, and a lot of times it's not a will issue. It's just that a skill of receiving feedback from a coach or a person in authority. It's a skill issue of being criticized in the public eye and some of the things our athletes go through. It's not a matter of will sometimes, it's just helping cultivate a skill. And then you put it in that language so that once they see it as a skill, a social emotional skill, well, I know how to do that. I know how to teach someone to shoot a free throw. I know how to teach somebody how to run a 5-yard out. And you kind of break things down like that. Like, this is just a skill thing. And what do we do when we practice a skill? Repetition, 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 and break it down like that. And I think it sometimes helps put it into language that they can deploy their awesome coaching skills to help build those skills within themselves or their athletes and not see it so much as a will thing.
Yes. Thank you. Definitely, it can be developed, right? Like all of the things that we're talking about, the skills, the strategies, the education, you can increase that, you can develop that. It's not a matter of you have it or you don't. So our time is winding down for our portion of the discussion for today. But before we go, I have a couple more questions that I want to pose to each of you. And the first would be, if you could share one strategy that you would encourage student athletes to engage in to manage the uncertainty, the unpredictability, the feelings that they may be holding, given everything that's happening in their personal lives, in the world, what strategy would you suggest to them as it relates to their mental health? What one thing might you encourage them to do?
I would say, and this involves going to therapy, but try and biofeedback. Biofeedback is excellent. Athletes are very in tune with their physical. And this is, a technique that pays attention to your physical presence as well as your psychological, and putting those two together might be of interest in a fun way, a non-traditional way to engage newcomers or, anybody in therapy. Right now always, it's important to make education or learning fun and interesting. And this isn't something that just goes away. You're essentially building muscle memory to relax your body during, checking in with yourself and noticing, these symptoms that are caused by stress, anxiety, things like that. This is a technique to kind of bring you back down, noticing, physical things about yourself, not just psychological. And I wish that I could explain it way better than that, but we have a biofeedback coordinator here that does that. And I think that, it's new, and it's not new, but it's different, and it might be new to them. So maybe that might give a different twist to therapy and open up some doors for some other opportunities.
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting there, not that I can explain it much better, but it's a mind-body connection, right? And if you are aware and attuned of what's going on with your body, then you can also be aware of what your mental state is when you're in certain states in your body, right? So when you're energized and when you're high energy, you can feel how your mental state is in. When you're calmer, you can learn how to control things physically to help control what's going on with your mood, with your emotions, and with your thoughts. And I think about mindfulness, meditation, and even breathing exercises as being some of those forms of biofeedback that you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So biofeedback, something that you can potentially do at home would be breathing exercises, which you can look up on YouTube, or there are apps abound, or some kind of mindfulness practice to help you become more attuned of how you're feeling physically and what's going on for you mentally, or meditation practice. Jacob and Abigail, what one thing would you suggest to help with mental health?
I'll jump in, Abigail. and you drive us home. So I think one thing for me that I keep coming back to for athletes is, I'll just like a strategy. I've been doing this with a lot of athletes and they've shared it to be helpful, is a lot of them there's so much uncertainty. They're getting tested a lot. There's quarantine protocols, there's things. And so I've really had them, and I know it sounds silly and can sound a little rudimentary, but I'm telling you it works, is I've had them write down a circle of what's in their control right now. And sometimes it's just their mindset and their attitude, their decision making. But there's usually at least 5 or 6 things that come to mind that, okay, this is what's within my control. I can talk to coach, I can talk to you, I can control the attitude, I can control where I put my focus right now. Just like we teach athletes attention control, what you attend to is what will fuel your emotions. And then I'll make them list all the things outside of their control. Other people adhering to social distancing, all these things that we can't control. And then I'll just usually have them circle like the one thing in the middle that's hardest for them to focus on. And then I'll put what's the one thing on the outside that's the thing you keep coming back to. And I'll just have them draw a line to those 2 things. And I'll have them write that down kind of regularly and check in and be mindful of, okay, how do I not just try to stop this one thing, but have something lined up, 2 or 3 things that I can orient my attention to that are real, that are right here, that I kind of have control over, and being mindful of what those behaviors are, what those thought patterns are. And I could go on a long tangent of examples, but that's the broad strokes.
Right, and it focuses on that control, which we feel so we've lost that in some ways. So identifying where we have it, vitally important. And then Abigail, we are running low on time. So in 30 seconds, maybe or less, what would be your strategy?
Yeah, so I'm actually just going to piggyback right off of what Jacob brought up is that mindset of control the controllables, right? Creating short-term goals that are attainable, not easy goals, but attainable goals, things that are within your control, within your mindset, because we know that when we feel like we're losing control, we experience distortions. We can become overwhelmed. And so to root yourself back in your why is important. Root yourself in your values, right? And make sure that the things that you are recognizing that are attached to your values are things that you want to embrace and grow and develop. And so, yeah, definitely control your controllables, because there are so many things going on right now that are uncertain. And so it'll bring you back and root yourself in who you are and who you want to be.
I want to thank you all for the information that you have shared, the knowledge that you have shared. Really enjoyed the conversation. And at this point, I would like to invite Amy Wilson to the screen, who is going to close us out for today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gunter. My name is Amy Wilson. My pronouns are she and her, and I serve as Managing Director for the Office of Inclusion. And Dr. Gunter, Abigail Eiler, Dr. Jacob Cooper, Dozie Uwagwu, thank you so much for the substantive and meaningful conversation today. In the way you talked about the spectrum of care and the community of care that we all must be creating and considering constantly for our student athletes, it's beneficial to all of us, particularly in the way that you put it in the context of the pervasive racialized violence that is ongoing in our country, as well as the pandemic. And thank you for addressing the tough subjects too. What are coaches' roles in this particular area of serving our students and their mental health? What about institutions that have low resources? What about the lack of diverse healthcare providers for our student athletes, who are increasingly a diverse population? So while we don't have all the answers today, we're working towards it. And I just so appreciate you being with us. And certainly this is dialogue that we need to consider and continue to have. I also want to thank former student athlete Ivy Watts, who was our lead in yesterday's session. You know, it was remarkable when today's panelists referred to it multiple times. And so thank you, Ivy, for sharing your personal journey. I have been saying to myself the last 24 hours, we all have a voice, we are all worthy, we are all capable, and we are all good enough. And so I encourage all of you who were with us today to share yesterday's webinar and today's with your colleagues across not only athletics, but also higher education. We will have today's recordings available soon on our inclusion website. And I want to remind all of you that the webinars for this week are part of a broader summer series that we created in the Office of Inclusion when our inclusion forum was canceled last April. And so if you go to our website at nca.org/inclusion, You will find webinars on LGBTQ, race, ethnicity, international. Soon, our other core area of disability and our mental health pieces will be available. And please stay with us for announcements in September about webinars that focus on women, our 5th core area. I want to close by thanking our partners in the INSEE Sports Science Institute for helping us with this webinar series this week. I also want to remind everyone that there are really valuable resources on the Sports Science Institute's website to support mental health. And also that there will be more information coming about the recent Diverse Student Athlete Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit that we held just last week. So again, we are dedicated to continuing to work on these issues as we move forward. There's nothing more important than the overall safety and well-being of our student athletes. So to all of you, as we continue to navigate pervasive racial injustices, a pandemic, and a natural disaster that has impacted the Gulf Coast, I hope we can all practice self-care, we can all care for each other, and we can continue this meaningful dialogue so that we can prioritize the voices and the needs of our student athletes and those who teach and lead them. Please, everyone, stay safe and well, and we'll look forward to being with you again in September for our webinars that focus on the core area of women. Thank you for being with us today.